Welcome to the Hemmeter History Series, which has been in existence for about 25 years. It's sponsored by the History Department at the Upper School at MKA, and has been throughout the years. The goal of the series is to bring people together to talk about things, and hopefully nobody is using or is leaving feeling angry. That's the goal, okay? So if you're feeling angry, I apologize ahead of time, but please don't email me about it. Just in terms of people who made this possible, I really want to thank, first of all, Paris McLean and Shani Israel, who worked with Montclair Kimberly Academy kids and MHS kids in doing a really wonderful event where we shared community with students from 2 different schools, and it's just very special. I want to say thank you to Nate and Jill and Granger for making this possible. The lighting, the sound, everything is because of them. So I really want to thank them quite a bit. Ashley Conde and Marnie McNanny were instrumental in making sure the photography is being done, the videography, and all sorts of logistical items that I'm not even aware of. So I really want to thank them. Layla Perkins worked overtime, making sure that people who are committed to the school had a special event at Nigel Furlong's house, and she did a great job with that. So Layla, thank you very much. And Kim Saunders is responsible for this. There is no way that my artistic ability represents how beautifully this is laid out. And it's because of Kim Saunders that it is. Her vision was wonderful. She engaged with the photographer and the videographer as well. So Kim, thank you as well. And then finally, the people who I relied on probably the most, Gretchen Barra and Madison Kilduff, just worked with everybody to get you all in here, to get you extra seats. People at the last minute who needed seats, they were the ones who really helped me make it happen. And they're just wonderful at the details that I'm not very good at. So thank you very much, Gretchen and Madison. So let me introduce, or do an introduction for 2 amazing women. And I have to say, it was one of the most difficult writing experiences I've ever had. So I just want to say that I'm going to describe what they've done, but I'm not going to capture who they are at all. Okay, but I do think that there are people in the audience who may not entirely know what Salamishah or Gloria have done, and so I'd like to do honor to what they've achieved in their lives so far and continue to achieve. When reading Salamishah Tillet's activities over the last year, it becomes apparent, or the last years, it becomes apparent that she is first and foremost a writer. Each of her impressive achievements trumpets this message. After completing her undergraduate studies at the University of Pennsylvania and a master's degree at Brown, Salamishah went on to earn a PhD at Harvard. All of her degrees are connected to the study of literature and writing. At Rutgers, she is the Henry Rutgers Professor of Creative Writing and African American and African Studies. She's also the director of Express Newark, the Center for Socially Engaged Art and Design. Tillet has authored numerous books, including In Search of the Color Purple, The Story of an American Masterpiece, and Sites of Slavery, Citizenship, and Racial Democracy in the Post-Civil Rights Imagination. Currently, Dr. Tillet is writing a biography of Nina Simone, which is why we played Nina Simone music as you came in. So I don't know if you know that, but that was the reason. And Nina Simone's music deserves to be played all the time. And the title of this is Nina Simone and the World She Made. And it's slated for release next year. As if she isn't busy enough, Dr. Tillet is an Andrew Carnegie Fellow, commissioned to write a cultural history of the world's largest social media movement in lieu of the law, Me Too, and the politics of justice. And she's also writing a biography of Serena Williams, just more, so wonderful. She won a Pulitzer Prize in 2022 for, quote, her learned and stylish writing about Black stories in art and popular culture, work that successfully bridges academic and non-academic critical discourse. Salamishah Tillet's activism transcends writing and scholarship, resulting in her founding A Long Walk Home with her sister, Along Walk Home is an arts organization that empowers young people to end violence against girls and women. She is also a founding member of the Black Girl Freedom Fund, a 10-year initiative to invest $1 billion to better the lives of black girls and young women and their families everywhere. I began to understand, this is a quote from Gloria Steinem, I began to understand with a terrible clarity that we teach what we need to learn and write what we need to read. Gloria Steinem has been the unrivaled, iconic symbol of the women's rights movement, and writing has been central to her life and work since 1960. Ms. Steinem first made her mark in 1963 with an article detailing life inside of a Playboy club. In what can best be described as gonzo journalism, a term that wasn't going to be even coined until 1970, Gloria Steinem posed as a Playboy bunny for 11 days at the Playboy Club. Her subsequent article about the experience destroyed the illusion of sophistication associated with this bastion of male power, exposing it for what it was, blatant sexism and the commodification of women. Ms. Steinem went on to create magazines that kept and still keep the voices of women at the forefront. She was one of the founders of New York Magazine in 1968, where she served as editor and political writer. In 1971, she founded Ms. Magazine, which brought feminism and women's issues into the mainstream. Ms. recently celebrated its 50th anniversary. Clearly, 1971 was a busy year for Steinem, as she also combined with other titans of the women's movement, including Betty Friedan, Shirley Chisholm, and Bella Abzug, to found the National Women's Political Caucus. Ms. Steinem has remained at the forefront of the women's movement, still serving in an editorial capacity for Ms. Magazine. She's also written several books, including an analysis of Marilyn Monroe called Marilyn, and another book, Outrageous Acts and Everyday Rebellions. In 2013, because of her impact on the lives of women in America and around the world, President Barack Obama awarded her the Presidential Medal of Freedom. I do want to mention one last thank you. The only reason that this evening is possible is because Salamishah Tillet said yes, and said yes to bringing Gloria Steinem. It's her connection with Gloria Steinem. And so I really want to thank Salamishah for making this entire evening possible. Now, without further ado, Gloria Steinem and Salamishah Tillet. It's right here. So thank you very much. So we're going to go through a series of questions, and I know we won't get to them all, but so let's begin with the first question I have. So I've given your introductions, which contain some of your biggest achievements, but as Mother Teresa once said, we can't do big things. We can only do small things with love. So in the spirit of that sentiment, what's a small thing you might have done that you would like to share here with the audience? And I don't care who begins first.
She's quick on her feet.
Well, I guess it has to do with homeless people in my neighborhood. You know, this is a New York event, and you never quite know what to do. But I've figured out that a little food or a little cash or something is helpful. And it just is a daily event, and it should not be happening in this country, but at least we can, you know, pretend that we're in the same human race.
Well, first of all, how excited are we to be here in Montclair? And I'll bring up why it's important for us to be in Montclair, because I first met you here many moons ago. But a small act, it's something that I've learned from Gloria and also from like lots of other feminist mentors of mine. Like so much of mentoring, so much of like working with another person who may be younger than me or in a different stage of their life. Like mentoring actually happens behind the scenes. And so there's a lot of small acts that people have shared with me and that I've shared with others that I think make it possible for us to kind of do the work that we're doing, but also my other life that I think you've talked about is in the academy. I'm a professor, and to move up in that world, it requires a lot of, as a black woman, and to have other black people and other black women move up in that world, it requires a lot of small acts that are behind the scenes. So I would say mentoring is a series of small acts behind the scenes that no one knows.
Nice.
Yeah.
So this is a question that now that we've talked in the back, you'll understand, but we have to change the question. So I said, how would you define a feminist or feminism? So would you prefer I change it to, because we talked about how this word is kind of a word that is problematic. Do you want to talk about the problematic element of the word? Do you want to talk about a word you prefer?
Well, we all get to choose what word we want, but the feminine part, femma sounds lesser than or weaker than or something. And so I always thought that Alice Walker's objection to it made sense. And to say womanist sounds stronger. However, for a guy to say he's a womanist is a problem.
Yeah, and this is where Gloria and I are going to disagree, because I've been in a room when Alice Walker explained womanist to my sister Scheherazade and me, and she really loves the lush word of womanish, becoming womanist, and so, but it was very Southern, and we didn't grow up in the South, and so we were declaring ourselves. I call myself a black feminist, and I do that because racial justice is part of how I define feminism. So I don't think I have as much of a problem with the word feminist, other than the fact that, and we were talking about this backstage, that when we think about the isms, the things that we're trying to, the oppressions that we're trying to challenge, like racist or heterosexist, feminist kind of sounds like it's like a negative word, when in fact it's a liberatory term. And so there's something about that ist part that kind of makes it not seem as open as we live it and as we want people to experience. So that's my only real problem.
I like humanist.
Yes. Yeah.
But then I was told I shouldn't say it because it means you don't believe in God. And then I thought, well, why not? Maybe I'm a humanist.
You're like, and therefore that word works, yes.
Well, that brings me to my next question. So Salamishah, we've talked in the past that, and maybe I got this wrong, but you and Gloria met in part because you disagreed on an issue.
Yeah.
So I think talking about what you were disagreeing on, but also that this movement is not a monolith where everybody agrees. There's many different opinions, just like always.
But the problem is that I don't remember the story because,
okay, so there's
now I love her.
Yeah, but it was, okay, so there's two versions of this story. So I met Gloria Steinem. So I think this happens at MKA for seniors. It happened at my high school. It was something called like a senior project. So my senior year, 1992, people who were much wealthier than me went off to Europe and backpacking. You could choose a month to dedicate your life to something. And my friend Jessica Blumstein and I interned at the National Organization of Women. So I spent my last month of my high school years working or interning at National Organization of Women. 3 really important things happened. 1, I went to my first Pride March, so that's 1992, that was at Asbury Park. The second one is I worked on a congressional campaign, and so that was like the Year of the Woman, the so-called Year of the Woman. And at this congressional campaign, this fundraiser in Montclair, I had the opportunity to meet Gloria Steinem. And so this just always, Gloria has no idea, I was 16, Gloria is still Gloria now that she was then. I was in awe. But it was just like, now that I know you and just how generous you are with so many people and so many fundraising for so many campaigns.
But apparently I fucked up then, so you might as well.
No, you didn't. I don't think she won. But I don't know.
We'll censor that, don't worry.
Yeah.
We'll censor.
But then, this is the story when, so in 2008, we had these 2 amazing presidential candidates, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, and I longed for the days when we used to argue about those 2. It seems, right? Like we can just clap for that. There was a public conversation between you and Melissa Harris Perry, and it was it's in that conversation, it felt like there was like, you had to choose Hillary, or you had to choose Obama, and you had to choose race, or you had to choose gender. So I wrote this blog based on the book. The blog was called All the Men Are Black, All the Women Are White. That's the name of the book. And some of us are brave. Yeah. So I said, some of us vote. And so I know Melissa very well, so I critiqued Melissa, I critiqued Gloria. Somehow the blog got sent to you, and then you responded to me, and you were so, first of all, like getting an email from Gloria Steinem after you've like, and I'm pretty generous even in my critique, but so then that's how we met. And then and I was like, well, I got her email address, so I'm gonna have lunch with Gloria Steinem. And that's how we became friends. So through that moment, but also just speaks to the way in which she engages debate, engages criticism, and also, like, I know that was a challenging moment for you, because when I interviewed you later, you said, after the New York Times op-ed, the worst thing was to be misunderstood. Mm-hmm. And so I think you were probably responding to many people, and I was one of them, and you just opened up so many worlds to me as a result, so thank you.
You know, the good thing about being really old is I don't remember.
Very nice.
But Shirley Chisholm was part of this. You know, I mean, I was campaigning for Shirley Chisholm, I think. Yeah. Right.
So you were her Treasury Secretary or something?
Something. I had some title in this.
Yeah.
So Gloria and Salamishah, you both have quotes, things that you have said in the past that either are misrepresented or accurate, but just basing Gloria off of one of the most famous quotes attributed to you, which is not actually your quote, which is, a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle. So I was wondering if there is a quote where you feel like either from your writing or that you said where you're like, yeah, that's good. That one is really good. Mm. And this is obviously to both of you.
Well, that quote, a woman needs a man like a fish, was actually written on the wall of a women's room in New Zealand or Australia or something, and it went around the world. Well, let's see, I mean...
But that wasn't your quote.
But that wasn't my quote,
yep.
Right. I guess because I made a bracelet of it, which I only found after years this morning, so I thought it was an omen, that we are linked, not ranked, is my favorite, right?
So, and Gloria has a book of quotables, so this is like one of those questions that you're like, why do I have to answer this? It's Gloria Steinem. I don't really write in quotes like that, but Corey, who works with Gloria, and I found a quick Google search, so, you know, Gloria Steinem quotes, Salamishah quotes. Okay, so here's one from me that I found on the internet. And now is my favorite quote. Okay, so anytime you break your silence as a survivor, there's a great power that comes with sharing, and there's a great power that comes with receiving. So that's my quote.
Nice.
Right
Good
now.
quote. Right.
Thank you, both of you. So I want to circle back to something we mentioned just a little bit earlier, but so feminist, womanist, the terminology. Now let's talk about what's the role for people who don't identify as female in the movement, the feminist movement or the womanist movement. So how would you both address, like, what's the role for somebody who's not a female?
Well, it's not for me to say. I mean, I think that we each get to identify ourselves as we wish and that we feel proud of and at home with, and that is not for somebody else to dictate.
I guess I would say that I've never associated identity, like how one identifies as a gender or sexuality or race or class. I think feminism is supposed to be, in its best version, I said this earlier, a big umbrella. And so it's supposed to be a big tent for it to be effective. I think that was the intent. That's how we live it. So it's not really about excluding people or people not feeling as if they shouldn't be part of it because the word feminine is in its root. It's also like a comparable thing would be like anti-racist. Like you don't have to, well, I would hope it's not only the charge of black people to be anti-racist, and I don't think it's the charge of people who identify as women to be feminist. It would be a waste of resources, opportunity, and also it would be, again, like ineffective for equality. So I think we both define feminism as, liberation, equality, democracy, anti-violence, peace. There's all these other synonyms that I think we both have for feminism, and that many people, hopefully, if we're doing the work that I think we're in service of doing, we're bringing more people into the category as opposed to shutting people out.
But it was controversial in a journalistic sense because for, I don't know, a decade, I'm not sure how many years, the New York Times would not use the term feminist.
What would they use?
I don't know. They didn't say women's liberation either.
Oh.
But I just remember picketing Abe Rosenthal.
Oh, okay. That's
because he
good to know.
wouldn't, expand the language, right?
Yeah.
Would he say why, or would the editorial staff say why they wouldn't use the term?
It wasn't the staff; it was just Abe Rosenthal. But then finally he changed. So I was and also they changed to using MS, which as opposed to
Miss
doing the
or
Mrs. That organizes all of the female world by our marital status. And he finally stopped doing, all of those things. And we went to see him, and we took him a whole bouquet of roses to say thank you. And then he said the most annoying thing, which was, if I'd known it mattered so much to you, I would have changed this long ago.
That's a great story. But it also speaks to, when we're talking about feminist, womanist, it strikes me that it's a struggle to find the right language to use. And you mentioned it, Gloria, Miss and Mrs. were the only two terms to apply to women, and now there's Ms. So in other words, there was a success, which even people don't even think about these days, of like, there's at least a third different way to refer to somebody.
And now there's MX, too.
Right.
That's also in the lexicon.
Which began in England, I think, not here, yeah. Right.
Back in the 1800s with the Pankhurst, or after that?
No, I don't think it was that long ago,
okay.
but right.
I think we kind of have to address the recent events of the last 24 hours. Is that okay? I was going to ask you a question about Dobbs versus Jackson, the Supreme Court decision of 2022, which holds that the right to have an abortion is not a constitutional right, paving the way for states to ban abortions of any kind, regardless of circumstance. But in the last 24 hours, those of you that aren't aware, the states of Ohio made it now a constitution, part of their constitution, that it is a right of people to have an abortion up to a certain point, and they cannot be changed. And then Kentucky and Virginia also had pro-choice elements to yesterday. So do you feel like Dobbs, that the people are speaking, that this is happening? And most people, according to surveys, identify that people do feel like the right to have an abortion should be a woman's right to choose.
It should, and the right not to have an abortion should be a woman's right to choose. I mean, it is so fundamental that we are able to make decisions over our own physical selves. But because, people say, oh, it wasn't part of the Constitution, so on. So yeah, but women weren't part of the Constitution either, So I think we're doing our best to be both accurate and inclusive. And the wonderful thing about language is that it is pliable and changes and grows and to express ourselves. So it's not like there's only one right answer forever.
Yeah, and I also think, I'm very optimistic. We knew that the majority of Americans actually felt like the women had the right to choose. We knew that the Supreme Court decision was retrograde even when it's leaked, so that it was out of step with how the majority of Americans felt about this issue. So what these elections are showing us is just that when you actually have a democratic process, as opposed to a few people making a decision for many, that choice is actually what people believe in, and they will, in red states and blue states, show that. So it's only proving what we all knew was true before. But I do think with Dobbs and Jackson, there's an article that I haven't written and in a way, because I'm a critic and not like an investigative journalist. But what I do find fascinating about that moment is it's framed exclusively in the framework of reproductive justice. But it actually, the clinic was used primarily by African-American working class women, that the issues of racism and reproductive justice, or reproductive justice as a term that thinks about working class women, women of color, that the abortion issue and the way it gets attacked is like intersectional, right? So it's not just women who can afford access to things. It is a specific, Dobbs was a specific group of women in a specific state who have less access, less resources, and so they were already vulnerable. And so our organizing around these cases and these situations have to always have a kind of feminist framework that includes an anti-racist discourse. And so I just want to, when I think about Dobbs and I think about the way in which we didn't even have the language around racial justice to deal with the fallout of that decision, it hurts, but it also, it's still the unsaid thing that we need to think about as we're continuing to organize around these issues.
In terms of, Salamishah, it strikes me in terms of language about race, are you involved, or what are your thoughts about Florida and their, the idea of critical race theory and the AP and things like that, and really pushing to omit any ability to talk about slavery, Jim Crow, and things like that?
There's something wrong with Florida.
It's not the water. I have a family there, so not everybody in Florida.
Not the people, just the governor.
Just the governor. It's weird when Disney is the voice of reason. It's kind of weird. I would just say this, that our relationship to history and our desire to constantly move past our founding sins is constantly going to catch up with us. And so the desire to remove slavery, segregation, to be anti-trans, to be anti-LGBTQ issues, they're all wrapped up. I guess it's the same kind of thing. It's like, if we don't think of feminism as something that's constantly trying to achieve racial justice, if it's not about trans rights, if it's not about equality for everyone, then it's ineffective. And so I think there has to be a lot more coalitions. And our friend Kim Crenshaw, a Black feminist scholar, has been working hard with the AP African American History course to just, those are the things that are being targeted, right? It's not slavery alone, but it's Black feminism, Black queer studies. That's the stuff that's being taken out. And so this is why we need a feminist language, because it's not simply segregation and slavery, but there are particular stories about who we are as a people that people don't want to deal with. So it's just, we always need this kind of always working together to remember who we are, but also those are the things that are going to be pushed to the side more quickly because people don't have this intersectional framework, essentially.
And also, we don't have a historical framework.
Yeah.
I mean, we have this crazy idea that this country was discovered when Columbus showed up.
Yeah.
I mean, there had been, millennia of civilizations here long before that.
Yeah.
So it's important and often crucial that we look at the language that we are using and are open to changing it.
Yeah. But I want to say one thing. We saw each other in California at the Makers Conference in 2017. And we were, my friend Therese and I, we were all downtrodden for reasons I don't have to explain, I don't think. And you
After November of 2016?
Yeah, after November of 2016. And Gloria said something, it may not come out here, so I would like to just reiterate it. You were optimistic. Gloria's a very fundamentally optimistic person. And you said, and we were like, why? We're because, this was a big election for us. We're like, oh my God, Hillary didn't win, it was, and you said, for the first time, at least in this version of American history, the liberals were in the majority. And it was only a person who has a long arc, who knows different cycles of history, could see it so clearly. And so it's a question today, do you still have that optimism? Are we still in the majority? I just want to, because it meant so much to me.
I don't know, but since optimism is a form of planning,
yes.
All right, And you have to imagine what could be before you start to go for it. It's my go-to
feeling. Okay, but
attitude.
Yeah.
And also because of knowing Wilma Mankiller, who was the chief of the Cherokee Nation, and other people who have a totally different sense of history, I began to realize how limited ours was, not to think about when human beings started as opposed to just when Columbus showed up.
So with post-Dobbs, do you have that, like after Trump won, there was an optimism. Do you have that feeling post-Dobbs or even post-affirmative? Like it just feels like we're even in a different cycle, and so, and if you do, please share it with all of us.
I don't know. I don't know whether we're in a different cycle or not, but it's very important that we think what we feel is the most liberating and supportive and compassionate thing to do, and do it regardless of whether it's the right language or the wrong language, or, because it's, hope is a form of planning, and we can't give it up.
Question for you all, building on that. So, Salamishah, you mentioned conflict, and that's kind of what you deal with in your life as activists. Do you have a retreat where you can collect yourself after, you must have had obviously tense exchanges with people over the years. How do you kind of collect yourself and find the peace that either to be positive or to just let go of it? Do you meditate? Do you go for walks? Do you have a punching bag in your apartment or something like that?
You have a punching bag?
And I don't meditate either.
So what do you do, though?
I see friends, people who share the same values. I laugh, tell jokes and laugh. It turns out that laughter is the only free emotion. I mean, you can make people sad or angry or, lots of things, but you can't force anybody to laugh. And again, in Cherokee culture, there is a figure, the spirit of laughter. And the idea is that if you can't laugh, you can't pray, because laughter breaks into the unknown. So I just want to say I take laughter seriously.
You're very funny. She's really funny. I feel like I'm loved by very good people, and by my friends and by my family, and I think that's just like an endless well that I kind of try to surround myself in. Also, my friends and family know I'm a workaholic. I'm also partnered with a workaholic. So work actually is sometimes quite pleasurable. And then also, can be demanding. I think, and so I say that because like everything I do, even when I'm trying to like do yoga or work out, I always let's do a race, or let's, do a new rowing activity. So even those things that are pleasurable, I kind of try to outdo myself. Okay. It's just my personality. So I think, but I do try to be physically active. I don't meditate as much as one should. I watch endless hours of TV.
Oh, nice. Do you have a recommendation?
You don't want to go down that road. But Reservation Dogs is a really good show, a beautiful show. And that's work though too. So, but I do think art and being present with artists and being present in the world of creativity, and then just my friends and family and being loved and loving back, I think hopefully creates an ability to rebound and reset and retreat. So. And
just being in. I mean, I'm not an in nature kind of person.
Yeah,
I'm really a New York kind of person. But walking out in Central Park and just nice. Looking at a tree is very helpful.
Yeah. Yes, looking at a tree. Yes, or sunset. Or New York City, view of New York City from Montclair. Yeah. Right.
You're also both. It strikes me you're both involved with people younger than yourselves. And so that's a form of energy as well.
Everybody's younger than me.
But I think that's, it's clearly you have joy in talking with younger people. And just watching you earlier today with the Montclair Kimberly Academy students and the MHS students is really wonderful. Going back in time to earlier on in your lives, so was it a conscious decision that you put yourself on kind of the path towards becoming an activist? Or did it kind of just all of a sudden, oh, well, I guess that's what I'm doing? So in other words, was it a plan like you were talking about, or did it just kind of gradually happen in a natural way?
I don't think it was planned. I mean, it's true that my parents kind of were activists, that they were in love with the Roosevelts and they lived through the Depression, and so that was, they gave me a sense that daily life was connected to politics and what happened. But because as I was saying, in order not to get married, I fled to India after I graduated from college, and because the Gandhian movement, the independence movement, was so much part of everything that it just gave me faith that it could and should be.
Yeah, I mean, that was nice to hear about your parents. I think for me, my sister and I grew up in Boston in our early years, and we're 70s children. So my parents were, you would call like cultural nationalists. They weren't in the Black Panther Party, but they were part of the Black Power movement. Thus my name is Salamishah, my sister's name is Scheherazade, and my brother's name is Shaka. And so we grew up with a consciousness around race from both of our parents and racism, and also like that the arts can be a form of liberation, can be a form of escape, can be a form of resistance. My father's from Trinidad and Tobago, and so he had a real, like the only time he was ever arrested was protesting in service of Trinidadian independence. And so I knew that was a possibility, like freedom and fighting for freedom is something that you should do. And he was really connected not just to Trinidad, but his view of the world is one in which people are connected across the African diaspora. My mom doesn't use the word feminist, but had a very strong gender consciousness that she raised my sister and me with. So that was the backdrop or the childhood of my childhood. But then we talked about this with the high school students, and so I went to an independent school near here in Livingston, New Jersey. I was one of 4 Black kids in my class. I lived in Trinidad for middle school, and I'd come to the United States for 8th grade. So that was a cultural shock. I'd lived primarily with Black people, whether it was in Boston or in a country of Black and brown people, and then went to this independent school in New Jersey. And so it was such a shock to deal with like everyday racism. And so eventually I started having a kind of consciousness around being one of 4, or having to navigate that world. And then I said this earlier, I was given summer I spent in Boston. Nicole gave me 3 books, The Color Purple by Alice Walker, The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, and Malcolm X's autobiography. And it just changed, it gave me the language and the vocabulary to understand what it meant to be a Black girl, what it meant to be a Black person in the United States. And then my senior year, as I said earlier, Anita Hill testified before Congress that she was sexually harassed by Clarence Thomas. That was the fall. And in the spring, the LA Rebellion erupted in response to 4 police officers being found not guilty for beating Rodney King. So that was my senior year, and I'd had this racial awakening, and then I had this childhood. So I felt like by the time I got to college, and this is, we both are writers, and so some people write. Writing is their activism, but I think what is very unique about Gloria, and hopefully slightly unique about me, is that we also believe in creating institutions and creating organizations and using infrastructures and also grassroots organizing to make change alongside the written word. I don't know if you feel this way, but you're an Aries. I know that means nothing to you, but I feel like I always have to act. Like I can't just be thinking. I have to do something and connect to people to create change. So for me, it's constantly figuring out what the best strategy is, and then trying to deploy as many means, or many tools as possible to make a difference.
Yeah, I would only add, I mean, as you were speaking, I was trying to think of, my earliest consciousness or whatever. And it's so important what kids see. My father had a little kind of dance hall in southern Michigan, and that meant that on weekends the bands came through to play. And in those days, the bands were often all white or all black, but you know, the black bands were very popular and amazing. And my mother used to cook for them, but there were no restaurants around. And I was convinced that the black musicians were nicer to me. I don't know if I made that up or not, but anyway, when I was like 3, 4, or 5 years old, it seemed like they listened to me, you know. And I have no idea whether that's true or not, but I just say it because it's so important how we treat little children.
And I think because I grew up in, even though it was Boston and Dorchester and a black neighborhood, and then moved to a black country, gender was for me foremost. Like seeing how girls were treated differently than boys, like in my family or in the community. So my gender consciousness precedes, because I was in a predominantly black space, like actually while racism was there, I wasn't interacting with like the everyday kind of racism that I would experience later on in high school. So gender, and I think this is like a question of like when did we become feminists and when do we identify that? I know you'll ask, but I think it's partly just being in an all predominantly black space allowed a gender consciousness for me that may not have happened if I were in a different kind of environment earlier on. So gender was really, I was aware that I was treated differently because I was a girl, and then the racial consciousness came later, and so then I was be able to think about them in tandem. So everyone has their own version of these things.
So one of my colleagues, Mr. Bosk, is going to love this next question. So it sounds like both of you traveled, and that was an element of moving outside, so you kind of saw the water that we were swimming in, and then you came back, and it was like, oh shit, this is not the only way to do something or the only way to be. Do you agree that like travel was kind of a part of the galvanizing experience for you?
Yeah, and leaving the US, I guess, too.
Yeah, no, living in India certainly was, but before that, because I was living out near Washington, D.C., and I needed a summer job. I guess I was in high school, I don't know. So I was working at a public pool. There are 2 public pools in Washington, one in Georgetown, which means it's entirely white, and one in Southeast, which means it's entirely black. And since I had applied late, they put me in the black
Southeast.
swimming pool.
Okay.
Yeah, right. And it was a really helpful, good experience to be the only white person in a group that was all black college students, other than me, we were all college students, working. And, you know, it was just great. I mean, first of all, I could feel they were waiting until I got over being self-conscious. Then I learned how to play bid whist.
Oh, okay. Spades.
I learned all kinds of dance steps that and the other thing that happened was that there were a couple of white teenage boys in the neighborhood who were very pissed that I was there. And so they would, you know, ride by and yell, what is that? You know, I mean, all kinds of terrible things. So I kind of realized that left to ourselves, it was very different from when troublemakers and divisive forces came in.
It's interesting, yeah.
Okay, so shifting a little bit. So when you were both younger, you broke laws and were even arrested. Salamishah, I'm not sure if you were arrested.
No, it's not me. Yeah, but
all
you
right.
sound like
Gloria, all right. I want to make that clear to Salamishah's children, she was not arrested.
I was not arrested.
But Gloria, you were.
Yeah, but I never actually went to jail or anything. I think no. I'm not sure it counts. Right?
Okay,
you broke laws, though.
you broke laws.
Yeah. Right.
And so do you think it's, like with the Dobbs decision and with other things that maybe our country is doing, do you think it's appropriate for young people to be breaking laws, to protest, to fight for things, or is that a bridge too far, or is that, like, you have to be very careful, or what do you think?
Well, when there are 2 different things, laws and justice, then it is important to be willing to break laws. Certainly the entire civil rights movement showed how important it really was to, even if it was such a thing as sitting at a drugstore fountain that that was segregated. No, I mean, not to obey unjust laws is really a love of justice.
Yeah, I mean, that's the King quote, right? If the laws are unjust. So, yeah, I mean, I think, well, and also protests are also different than breaking laws. So I wouldn't, sometimes they may be one and the same, sometimes they're distinct. But I do think, if anything, that we're indebted to this generation for galvanizing, and Black Lives Matter started before the summer of 2020, and that movement was largely led by young people who were interrupting people at brunch. They were doing die-ins on college campuses or in their neighborhoods or in their high schools, and so they weren't breaking laws per se, but they were interrupting the daily routine of people to say that the police killings that we were experiencing were unjust, unfair, and just dehumanizing. So I think that we should always, we're children of different social movements, and that we're indebted to this particular generation for reminding us of the limits of American freedom, and that it's not experienced the same. I mean, that's what Black Lives Matter, in its like most basic thing is suggesting or saying, is that not all of us are treated equally or fairly in the face of the law, or beyond what we think of as like the everyday kind of aspects of American citizenship. So I think, yes, people should protest. People should speak their truths. People should critique authority. And in some cases that requires pushing against the limits of the law when they are unjust and unfair. So, yeah.
Is there a book you'd recommend? For example, we've got a number of students in the audience. A book to read that would be, here's how you're kind of, there's a problem in your head. You see a problem in society. This is somebody who will help you understand the path forward.
Well, I mean, not exactly, but anything by Alice Walker, because she identifies with everyone, right? And the situations are so kind of daily and visceral. I don't know, what else should we tell them to read?
I mean, Baldwin is always a good, James Baldwin,
right.
Beale Street Can Talk, or Audre Lorde's Zami, a biomythography, I think, are good beginner books, or just even return books if you want to see something different in the moment that you're in, because you're different. So yeah, I mean, I guess we could endlessly talk about books though, because we're both writers, and we and have big libraries, and Gloria has like one of the most beautiful libraries in her home, because she has that very fancy ladder.
Yeah, well, I live in an old brownstone, and so the parlor floor has very high ceilings. So that was an opportunity to have lots of bookshelves and a ladder that obviously to reach there you needed, right. I'm very proud of my library.
Yeah, it's really pretty. It's very nice.
You're both activists. Is it essential to be kind of wedded to the cause? So for example, what I mean is, do you have to sacrifice yourself, the person you are, in order to follow this path and give yourself, so in other words, giving up some of yourself in order to follow the path that you're on?
I don't feel that, do you? No. I mean, it's a joy, and you find friends and who share your values and laugh at your jokes, and right? No, I don't think it's a sacrifice.
Also, I think like feminism's, like the adage is the personal is the political. So it would be kind of weird to suddenly say that your full self couldn't be part of the movement. What I do think though is, and we have different, we all have different hats, and so the writer in me is much more egotistical and also deeply insecure. The activist actually is less egotistical and a little bit more like, I don't need the same things that the writer needs. And so I think, I always feel like every academic I would wish could be an activist, in the sense that we can pull back and be like, just be okay in a room listening to people. Be okay in one part of my life I have to be the expert, and in these spaces I don't have to be the expert, because in fact that works against the movement, that works against the cause. So I think being aware of what parts of yourselves or what part of your ego needs to exist in different moments is also, at least for me, a very grounding part of being an activist. It actually helps all these other parts of my life in ways that you wouldn't necessarily know unless we talk about them out loud, right? So I don't know, I just want to say that I like not being the expert as an activist. It would be ineffective if I weren't listening to the communities that I'm part of and that are shaping the movement itself. So.
And activism requires all five senses and all kinds of, being an academic doesn't always. I mean, it could and should, but often it's, more about intellect and learning and, and not enough about activism. So they absolutely go together and complement each other.
What are you learning from young feminists today? And I say young, that can mean a variety of ages, but the language that they use, the approaches they take for pushing for rights, their protests against any number of different issues that are going on. And what issues I don't want you to necessarily speak for them, but what issues have you heard them talking about that maybe on the front that maybe people in this audience aren't really aware of because we're not following the movement as closely?
Mm-hmm. Well, when you said that, I got a kind of visual image because I think that we would have been more, in my generation, self-conscious about dressing in kind of hyper-feminine, crazy, colorful, I don't know what ways.
Shoes.
Right, yes, right, okay.
No, I know.
Which it doesn't make sense. So I've learned that from young feminists. I think, I wish I could tell them that it's okay whether they're in love or not in love or who they're in love with, because, that's hard times, I think, often for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the real pushing against the gender binary as just like a way of being is really radical and profound. I think for my generation, we're like that cusp generation where people were suspicious of bisexuality. It was almost like there were only two categories. We're more progressive than the generations before us, and so I think just like watching and experiencing young people live in the spectrum of gender identity, and then that actually kind of liberates us all from these roles, these rigid patriarchal roles it's really like, again, like another debt. Like if we ever were indebted to them for like Black Lives Matter, I think we're really indebted for getting us beyond a gender binary, even as they're constantly, and it's children who are constantly being attacked with this kind of pushback against transgendered rights and around children, in particular in Texas or in Florida. So I think like the biggest gift that young people are giving us is hyper attention to climate change, a radical understanding of what gender is and how it always was a kind of is a fiction, and also just they're much more clear because I teach students. They're just much more clear about the connections between anti-racism and feminism and class. I mean, it's not as hard as it seems like it was for prior generations. They have the language to do it, and therefore, and why this is important is because the right, or more sometimes kind of ultra-conservatives, they're actually using an intersectional lens, right? So if you look at Texas, it's not just transgendered rights that they're curtailing, it's voting rights, it's reproductive rights. Like the attacks are against all of these things. And so it's important for us to have the same sort of lens of anti-racism, feminism, pro-immigration rights, pro-transgender. We need to be as sophisticated in our analysis as the attacks are. And I think sometimes there's a gap between those of us who are organizing, we're kind of in all these different pockets and places, but the attacks are pretty consistent and they're coming from the same source. And so this is why I keep on championing us having like this coalition, because like if you use Florida or Texas, like or Dobbs, like you don't just happen to pick a clinic that's used predominantly by Black women as your test case, right? That's not coincidental. And so unless we have movements that are working together, we're going to keep on finding ourselves in a position where we're on defense as opposed to playing offense.
That's a great point.
And I think maybe when we're young, we're more likely to understand that, as who was it who said it, there's no dancing in the revolution, I'm not coming.
Yeah, I don't know who said that. That sounds good. Okay,
yeah,
that sounds good.
Right.
Yeah.
And that laughter is the only free emotion. You can make people afraid or sad or something, but you can't force them to laugh if they don't want. I mean, it's the authenticity and spontaneity that we need. That's what energizes us.
Salamishah in particular, but Gloria as well, how do you see the intersection of kind of racial justice and feminism in 2023? And, for example, are there tensions between racial justice and feminism?
Yeah, well, I think I've answered this different ways, but I'll just say what's been interesting about living in this moment is you have the two paramount social justice movements, Me Too and Black Lives Matter, founded by Black women. And so it is both an acknowledgement of the role that Black women have always played in our justice movements, but also, like, they're not competing movements, right? Like, they're movements that rely on each other, that learn from each other, that some of us are living in both of them at the same time. So I think if we look at those moments of possibility and convergence, it's really exciting. And there's like a project that we're about to announce that I've been working on with Ta-Nehisi Coates for like the last 2 years, right? So he's like our paramount Black Lives Matter writer, and we've been working on a fund for Black women and girls who've survived sexual assault. Like, I don't think anyone would have ever thought that Ta-Nehisi would be spending 2 years working on this, but that's the kind of like coalition building that I think is necessary for all of us, but also they're happening organically, and we just need to name it as such. So, but yeah, that's, I don't know. But Gloria, I would also say we were talking with, the history of the feminist movement from the 60s to 70s, we kind of think of as like, white middle-class women, but in fact, that's like never what it was. And so I don't know if you want to talk about.
No, not even statistically what it was, because I think the very first nationwide poll about the women's movement, feminism, women's liberation, was sometime in the mid-70s or something like that. And even then, Black women were twice as likely to support it as white women.
Yeah.
And now, why is that? Well, partly, I guess, because white women are dependent on their husband's incomes more likely, and therefore, more voting for their husband's interests. I don't know exactly why.
Yeah, I know you and Beverly disagree about this. Did you guys? Beverly doesn't think they're. She doesn't think Black women was as feminist as you think, but then she says that the stat was there too, though. Right. Yeah. But no, it's interesting.
This is why we have a good time together with a.
Well, and then you add Beverly Guy Sheftel in the mix. It's quite a party. So.
Gloria, I've heard you talk several times in your interviews about kind of capitalism and women's rights and disempowerment. And so this is a complex issue and a big one, but is there something both of you, how you'd like to say, and I haven't even brought in race as well, but just speaking about capitalism, and is there a way to understand how, in America, if somebody criticizes capitalism, they're a socialist or a communist, but I think it's important that we actually be able to say, here are some, it's not a God that we have to worship.
No, I mean, why would I be a capitalist? I don't have capital. Your
books.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad people buy but that's not the same thing, and I mean, I've never invested in some big capitalist venture. I don't even know how do we define capitalism these days, but I don't feel like a capitalist.
Fair enough. Salamishah?
Yeah, I mean, you threw me off with that answer, but okay. You're like, I don't believe, okay. So your question is about capitalism and its relationship to feminism?
Right, so for example, I guess maybe to frame it a little differently, if we were living in a country where socialism was the predominant kind of ideology of the government, is there, in your mind, a way that this would be better for women?
So it's like you have that article about, oh God, I forget. It's about like masculinity and wealth. You know that? The masculinization of wealth?
Oh, the masculinization of wealth and the feminization of poverty.
Yeah.
No, I think those two things have happened and are still happening. It seems to me that our well-being ought to be based on our work, not our bank account that came from our parents or something. It's just not right. And it's also penalizing the country.
And then what I like about that essay is just if we look at the feminization of poverty is how I think we tend to talk about it in sociology, but like, you know, there is such huge income disparity, but also like when you add race to it, Black women and Latino women or Latinx women are so far from a dollar, you know, like if you look at the comparative analysis. And so Pamela Schiffman and I wrote this article at the height of, an op-ed at the height of the pandemic. And what we wanted was like, what if we actually use like a racial justice and gender equality lens when we just did budgeting? That was like the one thing. We're just like, if you look at how resources are allocated in federal funding or philanthropic dollars, if we use this lens of justice when it comes to how we allocate or reallocate resources, we would at least have like a way to create more equity and equality in our culture. So just changing the language, and part of that actually did slightly happen under Biden. They started doing some analysis around race and gender and how the federal budget and kind of different line items were, but you know, it's not the full way of doing it. But that's one way of, I guess, like answering this question. It's like our values are expressed in our budgets. What kinds of practices are we really using justice to create our budgets? Are we thinking about wealth redistribution as a way of creating equality? And in a system in America, which is still inherited from slavery, what does that look like over generations and generations? Like, it's not coincidental that there is and my partner Solomon spends a lot of time talking about this stuff, but it's not coincidental that there are communities that are so much poorer than other communities. That's not like happenstance. That's actually a practice over time in which certain groups have access to capital, resources, and wealth, and other people don't. And so how do you start like equalizing that more? And what are the things that we need to do and is that something that we are committed to as a country, as a people? It doesn't seem like we are, but it's also, we're gonna keep on like being locked in this terrible system of inequality if we don't start addressing it more forthrightly.
And just thinking about, not even about wealth, but about salaries. I mean, right now we pay parking lot attendants more than childcare attendants. Do we care about our cars more than No, it's that one is a male profession and the other is a female profession and more people of color and so on. So just to look at that and how crazy it is.
Yeah, that's, gosh, yeah.
One last question.
Okay.
This is an easy one, I promise. But Ms. Magazine is still going strong. Are there magazines or publications that you would recommend to people in the audience that you could say, this is really, if you want to be up or reading things this is presenting the issues, is there a good feminist or womanist publication you'd recommend?
Well, they're mostly regional, actually, the feminist and womanist publications. But I would say read as trustworthy a publication as you can and respond when you know it's inaccurate. Writers and editors actually pay attention to people who write and say, you fucked up in this way, you know, and here's the fact, and here's what you didn't cover. And so, you know, don't just be a consumer of media, be an activist within media.
Yeah, so what do you read though, like every day? Like do you read, are there newspapers or journals?
Well, I mean, first I spend hours reading my email.
All right, you're very good. I do not.
Because there's the next Salamishah coming that sent her an email.
Yeah, someone's responding to you. So emails, and then what do you consume?
And I do read the New York Times, right? And then I have a big stack of books that are books I have been wanting to read and haven't.
Yes,
right?
yes. I have
so
those.
I'm chipping away at that, right?
Yeah, I mean, we probably read, I'm an avid consumer of news. I have a lot of subscriptions to different publications. It's a good question. I think we're in like an anniversary of Jezebel. There's a lot of articles about Jezebel and its radical, I saw a headline, online, commitment to women's anger was Jezebel. So it's kind of nice that it's having a retrospective. I don't know, though. It's a good question about feminist newspapers, feminist journals. I don't know if I have the explicit, I just read so much and get so much information from sources both nationally and then internationally. So I'm trying to always get different perspectives on the same issue. So it does require me to read outside the US a lot as well, just because different places have different perspectives on things happening. Yeah. So,
yeah, Gloria, I remember in that I think it was Apple TV, the Dear series, where you had women writing to you from, I think even from China and from a number of different places, talking about how your life, your work had affected them. So, yeah.
No, that's incredibly moving. There's nothing more energizing and moving and than somebody who writes to you and says what we wrote, something that we said or did mattered to them and how. I mean, that is more than reason enough to always keep going.
And I just want to say, because one question we didn't get to is something that we've learned from each other. And one thing I would like to say to you is that I knew this before knowing you, but it has been reaffirmed through my friendship with you. It's just that so much of being a feminist is what you do in private. So much of being a feminist is the kind of relationships you have and how you treat people when no one else is looking. So that could be an email that you're writing in response to in the middle of the night. But I think sometimes so much of like the political work is so public, or it's at a podium or a pulpit, but really it's like, I truly believe that like how we treat each other when all of the things aren't there is actually where our politics lives. And so, I want to thank you for reaffirming that, and you just live that life.
No, well, I want to thank you for thinking I lived that life. Thank you very much. No, but it's just, there's so many opportunities that we let slip, I remember leaving my house one morning and deciding, okay, I'm just going to talk about, I've forgotten, an upcoming election, whatever it was, but the first person I don't know. And it was the mail delivery guy. And I discovered he was the political boss of Queens. He was a great source of information.
Organizing on the spot.
Right, or I'm standing on the curb waiting to cross the street, and there's somebody standing next to me, and I try to, it's a fascinating, rewarding just exercise, because there's so many times when we are with other people, and yet we are not acknowledging those people or being acknowledged.
Thank you. Yeah.
What I'm hearing from you both is, it sounds simple or simplistic, but like walking out the door and being kind, and moving, and you've established a bridge, a link, and then continuing that link to other people, and all of a sudden the world is a better place.
Yeah.
I want to thank Salamishah and Gloria for coming to this MKA. We're going to take a couple photos.
Oh, okay.
Just one moment. Oh, yeah. So I do want to say just one thing. I've run, by the way, my name is David Hessler. Sorry about that. But I do want to say I've been running the Hemmeter series for 25 years or 26 years at MKA. And I can tell you with certainty that there was a trend when this event was announced. And I didn't realize at the time, but it became overwhelming. I had female faculty coming up and saying, I'm bringing my mother to this event. Or students, female students saying, I'm bringing my mother to this event. Or my mother saying, I'm coming to this event. So I think it's really a beautiful experience, and it's a testament to these two wonderful women that I think thank you, right, is thank you. I think that's why people are here. So we're going to do, we want to thank you all for attending. We're going to do a couple of photos with Nigel and Nicola's wife. And are we doing a photo with students or we're not doing that? Okay, so just a couple of photos, but you're welcome to leave at this point. And thank you very much for coming, and have a good evening. See you.
You're gonna do one more. Mom, see you later. Thanks for coming in.